Zoe, by its very title, The Punisher is confrontational and has buried in its name virtually the entire narrative. What do you think of that?
David, one always watches within a context. And I watch, as you do, as every audience does, with a certain visual capital. And I bring to watching something like The Punisher, which I must say I found quite difficult watching, these examples of vigilantism in movies. Dirty Harry, the iconic Clint Eastwood movies, early 70s, and Charles Bronson, the urban vigilante writ large in Death Wish, and there were 5 of them. And what is interesting, I just want to just briefly make this point and ask you what you think of this. What is interesting about the Charles Bronson Death Wish franchise was how anxious the producers were and how the audience loved it. The New York Times in 1974, and remember 1975 is the first time that Frank Castle, the original Marvel Punisher, appears in the Spider-Man comic. The New York Times review in 1974 of the Bronson Death Wish said this is a despicable film. It raises potentially complex problems, complex issues, and handles them or offers responses which are oversimplified, bigoted, and frivolous. And they went on to say it's a bird-brained movie which must be dear to the hearts of the far right. Now, I think what we have here in Frank Castle, The Punisher, is another icon for the angered. In that tradition, what do you make of that?
Those are excellent ideas. This point about another focus for the right doesn't apply to Frank Castle because there's no target that a rightist would find objectionable. There aren't the traditional anti-Semitic, anti-black tropes, even remotely. What there are, in fact, are structures that you'd think the hard right would approve of. CIA doing dirty ops, or whatever they call black ops.
Black ops.
Yeah, breaking the rules to sort out who they really don't like. And at the same time, just to keep a appropriate moral tone and hostility towards the black ops, they're using it to smuggle heroin, which is ultimately to the detriment of every returned veteran if he's slightly out of his mind, the way most of them are.
I think why I found it difficult viewing was, and perhaps this is an unreasonable expectation of what is ultimately a very popular medium. This is not a film festival movie. I found it difficult because there were no surprises, none at all. Every single expected conventional trope was explored, or not particularly explored. And the transposition of the Bronson vigilante in New York to a recently returned vet, Afghanistan or Iraq, it's been explored in fiction, it's been explored in movies over and over again, and in outstanding documentaries. So what surprises, if any, were there for you? And is that an unreasonable expectation?
No, I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation. I think one really has to be a dope to go to quality television to be consoled, or to be doped slightly, or to be made soporific, or to actually see that the knickknacks on the table are actually more important than the image on the screen. The thing about streaming shows like Netflix is that there is a new compulsion to watch. It's a different way of consuming television imagery or video imagery. And Frank Castle, as the Avenger, does this to me. Firstly, every episode is ritualistic.
Yes.
It is a liturgical ritualism. There are proposals of great evil and intimations of great good. And sorting it out is the faintly flawed figure of Frank himself, who, because of his own appalling loss, number one, but let us not forget for a moment that his appalling loss occurred while he was a member of such a hot pursuit, hot executional squad himself, when a fully fledged Marine.
An outstanding performance, which I think gives some gravitas to the character of Frank Castle, which is...
You see, that's where we're going to deviate, you and I. I don't think it's an outstanding performance. I think it's a performance that comes off the pages of a comic book. The only thing missing is kapow.
Yes, but that's the point. The point is that what else can you do with it? I think what is interesting about his performance is that he's able, chameleonically, if you like, to inflect it. There is a which is very difficult to do with such a one-dimensional role. I think that he is able to, because he has to engage the viewer's sympathy. He actually has to. Otherwise, I don't think he could continue watching.
He sure as hell didn't engage my sympathy, but he certainly engaged my interest. And the interest I had was, it was variable. Just some disconnected thoughts.
Yeah.
First disconnected thought is that here is a person in the real world, an actor in the real world, who is a famous and highly applauded stage actor. Yet what's he doing in the show? He's virtually inarticulate. Most of his verbalizations are grunts. He grunts when he punches someone. He grunts when he gets punched. He grunts when he puts Billy's face through a mirror. He grunts when he gets stabbed with a shard of glass. There is a panoply, if that's the correct collective noun, of grunts. It sounds like bonobos in the forest.
but skillful grunts, elegant grunts.
Actually, it's surprisingly non-verbal.
Yes.
For what's going on.
And his face is outstanding.
Well,
that face is perfect for the role.
It is. It's as if it was made from a mold.
Yeah.
But he really does look like that. It is so angular. And right, so you have these ritual episodes. There's always some form of redemption from a female, from a woman figure. It might be the FBI's mother, who's a doctor, who deals with him at the pre-title sequence of the final episode in series 1, where he's brought in. You might have noticed he's brought in like Jesus. Jesus has just come off the cross. He is lying in a cruciform mode, being held up by the people. Don't bring him in here, said the Romans might be watching. And no, we must deal with it. But he is a freedom fighter, they say in Farsi to each other. The parents are Persians. And they say, yes, that's why we must look after him. And there's no time to argue. He's dying, we must deal with it. So he's put onto the bed. He is bleeding in the most extraordinary way. His facial wounds are astonishing. His internal wounds are obviously enormous. He is a fountain of blood. He bleeds and 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 he bleeds. And he's lying there, and they minister to his needs by putting a trocar, or they puncture his lung and suck out the blood with a giant hypodermic, and he says, that's better, like a pirate.
I think you want to audition for this role.
And then a few minutes after that, the titles still haven't begun. He's in somebody else's clothes, and he's got a plaster on his wound in his chest, and he's off to sort out Billy.
Well, he's a superhero without superhero powers. After all, he's unique in the Marvel universe, surely.
He's got superhuman, but he's got superpowers.
He can survive internal injuries.
Is that he never takes his eye off the ball. I'm going to get even.
Yeah.
And the other superpower, he can concentrate. And the other superpower is that he is capable of inflicting and tolerating the most extraordinary human damage.
I have to say that's why I found it very difficult to watch. It is ritualistic, and the narrative arc has its crescendo more or less at the same point in every single episode.
Yes.
The violence is one of the critics referred to it as balletic, choreographed violence.
Well, Penn. It's the natural development of Bonnie and Clyde, except there was no slow motion, I noticed.
No, there wasn't. No.
But yes, all that is true. So there is a catharsis at the end, which I should imagine a certain type of audience actually feels. I couldn't identify with his crises. I couldn't identify with his way of dealing with the world, and I found most of it unutterably awful as a series of ideas. It's, one's kind of tempted to say, oh, it's a morality play.
No.
It's Noah's Flood. It's
No.
not a morality play.
No.
It's a comic book.
Well, that is the other visual capital that I brought to watching this, which is really perhaps a little unfair, because and that was having watched probably most of the feature films made that are set in Iraq or Afghanistan, and most of the documentaries, and there's some very fine ones set in Afghanistan. So for me, not only there was nothing new in this, and it was poorly done. There was no authenticity, whatever. It's just the tropes over and over again. Post-traumatic stress, can't cope with the world, support group, baddie, going to redeem himself, going to revenge. So there's not much to take from this, I didn't think.
It was astonishing. I saw some of the movies you've described, and one was engaged because they were real people mostly, particularly the ones that were documentaries, and were revelatory in terms of just how utterly frightening and horrible a high-tech war is.
Remember David Simon's Generation Kill?
Yes,
which was a mini-series, 7 episodes, which was outstanding.
That was my best.
Yeah, Generation Kill and the Hurt Locker, Battle for Haditha. Those were the docudramas, if you like, but completely different. I mean, as much violence in Generation Kill. Many of the aspects which are just gestures in The Punisher. But I think you're right. It over 7 episodes there was character development. There was substance to engage with.
I was informed by that, not distracted, catharted, or entertained particularly.
Generation Kill.
Generation Kill. Whereas this thing I watched, this Punisher dude, I watch it and I watch it and I watch it, and it. Apropos of the pre-title sequence in the final episode, just run your mind over what goes on in that time. The tension between saving Frank for the 900th time, plus the escape of Billy from normality, from his business.
Yes.
The final scene. This is the final scene before titles. It's a long section. He has killed everybody who's come to get him. Coolly. I wouldn't even say professionally, because it was pop, 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 pop. It was a cartoon episode. Then as he walks down the driveway or the exit of the building, he presses a remote over his shoulder, and first one explosion occurs in the most distant door, then another one, then another one, then another one. I realise it's all CGI, but there wasn't even an attempt. There wasn't even an attempt by the maker of the film to suggest that there was any blast. If one of those things had gone off, he would have been blown from one end of the world to the other. There were about 9 of them. Then he just copes. Boom, boom, great explosions of flame.
Well, once again, doesn't it go back to where we started? The audience. The audience is not demanding anymore. The audience, it doesn't matter.
Well, one then asks the most pertinent and judgmental question, are we not being insulted by this film, by this series? Is it not an insult to watch such disarticulated, disambiguated moral garbage? And at the end of everyone, to pick up your point, there's the orgasm of violence, where there is death and death and death and death and death and death and guns that never need to be reloaded.
In contrast, I don't think, and it's a distant memory, but I don't recall Dirty Harry or Death Wish being anything as violent. But it was a different time, and there were different expectations of what one could and couldn't do. But it was still shocking to many people. But there's a sense of immunity now. We are the kind of banality of violence. It's like a video game. It really is like a video game.
He's first person shooter all the
Yeah.
time, except
Yeah.
when he's Billy, when they're both first person shooters.
Yes.
What do you think of the woman? The FBI lady, Madani.
I think it's an interesting insertion into a film to have your token Persian person who comes with the role a whole implied background, like a Peace Corps volunteer, but she's actually a war maverick, and enormously competent and conflicted. And her mother is a kind of voice of conscience, but she's able to manage it like the guys. So I think once again it's a strategic placing. You have all the tropes in place, and a slightly different female protagonist, which stands in obvious contrast to his wife, whom we only see in flashbacks, repeated flashbacks, and the journalist, blonde woman in season 1. Who seems to yearn for Frank.
Why do you think the FBI special agent and Frank are not lovers? I ask this question because, boy, does she go out of her way to get him out of trouble. What's the motive? It's a strong possibility that there isn't a motive because it's a comic. But
I think,
on the other hand, what is she doing?
well, do you think it might be, I think this is a stretch, but do you think it might be to create a kind of tension that is unresolved for the viewer?
That would be a good one if she was a better actress.
Yes, she's...
And if she had better lines to say.
Yes, I think the key is better lines.
Yes.
I think they're not that bad in terms of acting prowess, but the script, particularly considering we've recently discussed the extraordinarily outstanding script of Russian Doll.
Oh, God.
And I think that is possibly the unspoken in everything we've said,
Yes.
the unspoken piece of visual context. It's difficult to move, except to place in contrast, to move from Russian Doll to The Punisher, and view The Punisher, or give it any rating that is anything but very pedestrian.
You know, earlier you were talking about post-traumatic stress disorders,
Yeah.
vets returning from these hideous wars and out of their minds. And the implication in your observation is that somehow this has something to do with Frank. But slowly you realize that there was a true PTSD, the true post-traumatic stress disordered soldier who was in the discussion group first of all and then went out of his mind. Remember, quite early on in the series. And that was the archetypal textbook, post-traumatic stress disorder crazy. Frank isn't. Frank is an avenger. Frank is a frontiersman wanting to get even because them redskins have scalped his wife.
Exactly. It's exactly in that that narrative framework. He's on the frontier.
And yes, it is. And the customs officer, so to speak, of the frontier, the person maintaining the frontier, is this mysterious special agent, Ramdani, who is, however, ambiguous in what she allows to happen and what she fails to prevent and what she seems to encourage.
She's a kind of Homeland, Claire Danes type person. She's an offshoot from Claire Danes.
Let me correct that. She's about 0.002% of Claire Danes.
Yes.
But it is a pure substance.
Yes. And she was authentic. She's Persian. Not Iranian, Persian.
Yes.
Yeah. I like the idea about Frank being a frontiersman and therefore fits into that whole mythology. None of the rules and regulations need to apply to him because he is actually on the frontier, defending what is good, what is right. I can feel the national anthem coming upon me.
You know, there were two crucial opportunities in the final carnage, which were not exploited as metaphors, in my view. Firstly, playgrounds, usually with creepy playground music, or a cliche, but there was no creepy playground music. There were in fact adults, apart from the flashbacks of his own children, but the adults who were there and that were hostage to misfortune. But then mirrors are smashed again and again and again, sometimes with elbows, sometimes with feet, but mostly with faces, and it was always the most savage interface, so to speak, between human face and broken glass. It went on and on and on and on, but at no time was there the faintest intention, I think, on the part of the scriptwriters to exploit the idea that there is a reflection here, that there's dare I say it, a metaphor going on.
Well, think about Mirror in Russian Doll. It was a veritable portal.
But that's what
and I think absolutely recognized and developed, precisely developed as a metaphor. I don't think that it was even remotely recognized as anything other than as a cul-de-sac, truly mixing things up. But in The Punisher.
You know the other thing in The Punisher, which made it a part of the cliche of that kind of stuff, is that he had a magical friend who could do things. He lived in a funny little sort of basement, which nevertheless had the greatest hardware available, whereby he could read any computer or anybody's mind, photograph anybody's earlobes from here to there, and identify them with databases, could do the most amazing things. He could keep an eye on his family who think he's dead. This is the magical man. And in the end, close to the end, what does the magical man do? He gives him the money that he has stolen from someone else's account, so he, the Punisher, can go away and escape from all this, feel rewarded, and have more money than he could ever spend in his life. And without that magical person, nothing would have happened.
So he's the fixer. One's the Avenger, one's the fixer, but the fixer's got the brains.
The fixer's got the brains. The fixer's got a secret.
Yeah.
The fixer also is, on first meeting, enormously menacing.
Yes.
And he's completely denatured.
Yes.
Because he's actually a man who loves his wife and
yes.
children.
And exactly. Once Frank enters his domain, David Lieberman, if I remember correctly, becomes quite a nuanced character, a very sympathetic character. One likes him, and one likes nobody else.
Well, it's sure as hell doesn't like Frank.
No,
because apart from anything else, Frank is one-dimensional. But the Magic Man is three-dimensional. And he's a contemporary Magic Man.
Well, I was just going to say, the Magic Man is modern man. Frank is primitive.
Deeply. I mean, he could be wielding a club.
Well, in the beginning he is, of course. Bash, bash, bash.
Are you going to watch series 2?
No.
Ask me.
Are you going to watch series 2?
Well, funny enough, I'm halfway through it.
All right. In closing, why should I watch series 2?
Because you'll find not only the corny characters of American comic books, you'll find all those black and white photographs of photo magazines circa 1971 made in Durban, South Africa. There's a bent minister, bent priest. There are people who appear out of trees with machine guns. There's a helicopter that lightens them up. That's Ramdani, admittedly. The whole thing, and there's a runaway.
A runaway?
A runaway child who's actually a young woman who's actually kind of unreliable, but manages at one point to pull a bullet out of Frank's bottom, more accurately out of a hole in Frank's bottom, where it was shot into him.
I can't wait.
Well, I promise you, I've robbed you of nothing.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Now, I have another question.
Yes.
I can't remember. Is there any music in this show?
There has to be.
There is.
Yes,
God, yes.
Yes.
Remember when he...
Yes, there is.
What, in the final scene, there's Creedence Clearwater Revival as he's walking around.
Yes.
Dead man, dead man, dead man.
Choreographed, remember?
Boom, boom,
Yeah.
bang, boom, boom, boom.
You know,
Poppity,
I
poppity,
would fear
bang.
if I was John Berthel. I mean, I'm thinking the older man, season 3, comes back at 82. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
David, I think we've wrapped up here.
I feel so unwrapped, but yes. Oh, R-A-P-T. Oh, you mean? Yeah. Look, it's a provocative show, and I can see that it has an audience. And my closing observation is a repetitive one. What's a red hot actor doing in a low grade role with lousy scripts?
Money.
Yeah, but he's of the theatre. This person, they don't do things for money.
That's why they do it. Ask Benedict Cumberbatch.
Well, that was fascinating, Zoe. I was particularly fascinated by the way you brought that other stuff in.
Are we finished?
No,
Oh.
I realise that our discussion has reformulated my ideas because I've never articulated Frank Castle with those old 70s movies, but it's a straight line. I've tried to locate him in medieval places, magicians and virtuous women and the rest. There's nothing of the sort.
No, there's a straight line, really there is. Made uncomfortable by the fact that it's bang in the middle of mass shootings in America.
Oh, the most appalling mass shootings. Always, yeah. Well, thank you, Zoe. I am enlightened and informed. And as a result of this, I certainly will go to the end of Series 2.
Well, I will start watching Series 2. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Zoe.